Breaking news, boycott movement collapses. Japan's new prime minister refuses to befriend Xi Jinping over the phone. Protests in Shanghai cause bloodshed. The tensions between China and Japan have been palpable, often exacerbated by historical grievances and territorial disputes. Despite the persistent anti-Japanese rhetoric promoted by the Chinese government, the reality on the ground paints a very different picture. The boycott Japanese goods movement, heavily propagated by Beijing as a way to stoke nationalist sentiments, has crumbled under the weight of economic pragmatism and personal choices made by Chinese citizens. During China's National Day holiday, Japan remained a top destination for Chinese tourists. According to recent data, more than 53.1% of Chinese travelers opted for Japan as their primary holiday spot, with cities like Tokyo and Osaka seeing a significant influx of visitors. This stands in stark contrast to the anti-Japanese narratives seen across Chinese state media and government-controlled platforms. While the official line insists on promoting nationalist fervor, in reality, millions of Chinese tourists are eager to experience Japanese culture, purchase high-quality Japanese goods, and indulge in Japan's advanced consumer markets. One might ask, why does the boycott collapse so spectacularly despite being pushed so heavily? The answer lies in the deep and unshakable appeal that Japanese products hold for Chinese consumers. Japanese brands are synonymous with quality, reliability, and innovation, attributes that make it difficult for many Chinese consumers to resist. From electronics to cosmetics and even fashion, Japanese products are preferred by the growing middle class in China, who are willing to overlook the nationalist calls for boycott in favor of personal comfort and satisfaction. In addition to this, the steady flow of Chinese students heading to Japan for higher education further undermines the calls for a complete boycott of anything Japanese. Japan's higher education system has become increasingly attractive to Chinese students, offering advanced programs in engineering, technology, and other fields. This growing student population reflects a desire for a connection to Japan, one that stands in sharp opposition to the anti-Japanese rhetoric fueled by the Chinese government. There is a glaring contradiction between the government's message and the actions of its citizens. This highlights the deepening divide between state propaganda and public sentiment. While Chinese state-controlled media continues to push narratives about resisting foreign influences, particularly those from Japan and the West, the reality is that China's own citizens are ignoring these narratives. A prime example can be seen in the immense popularity of Japanese culture in China itself, with Japanese restaurants, films, and fashion finding wide acceptance despite the supposed boycott. The relationship between China and Japan, already strained by historical tensions and territorial disputes, has reached a new turning point under Japan's newly appointed prime minister. In a recent phone call with President Xi Jinping, the Japanese leader made it clear that he has little interest in pursuing a close diplomatic partnership with Beijing. This refusal to engage more deeply with China, despite Xi's overtures, is emblematic of the growing rift between the two nations, particularly in the context of Japan's strategic shift towards stronger alliances with Western countries and other regional powers like India and the Philippines. Xi Jinping, in his characteristic style, extended a congratulatory message to the new Japanese prime minister, emphasizing the importance of China and Japan being close neighbors. However, behind the formal pleasantries, there is an undeniable undercurrent of tension. Beijing has long sought to maintain stable relations with Japan to counterbalance its growing isolation on the global stage. Yet, Japan's leadership, especially under the new administration, has grown increasingly wary of China's aggressive foreign policies, particularly its military actions in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. This shift in Japan's stance reflects a broader geopolitical reality. Japan, once willing to engage diplomatically with China, is now more aligned with the United States and other allies who share concerns over Beijing's growing assertiveness in the region. The rejection of closer ties with China comes at a time when Japan is ramping up its defense spending, expanding military cooperation with Western powers, and positioning itself as a key player in the Indo-Pacific. For Beijing, the refusal of Japan to strengthen bilateral ties is a significant diplomatic setback. China, already grappling with strained relations with many of its neighbors, had hoped to keep Japan within a more neutral or cooperative sphere. Instead, Japan's pivot towards a more confrontational stance poses new challenges for China's regional ambitions. This is especially relevant in the context of Japan's participation in discussions around forming an Asian NATO, which seeks to contain China's influence across the Indo-Pacific. Such moves are viewed by Beijing as direct threats to its security and long-term strategic goals. Furthermore, Japan's reluctance to warm up to China comes at a time when Beijing is already under immense pressure due to its domestic economic struggles and increasing international isolation. China's economic slowdown and mounting internal challenges make diplomatic relationships with key economic powers like Japan even more crucial. The loss of potential economic cooperation with Japan further complicates Beijing's ability to manage its faltering economy. In essence, the refusal of Japan's new prime minister to deepen ties with China marks a significant turning point in East Asian diplomacy. It sends a clear signal that Japan is distancing itself from China, opting instead for alliances that counterbalance Beijing's growing influence in the region. For China, this is not just a diplomatic snub but a strategic loss, one that could have long-term consequences for its geopolitical ambitions. The era of delicate diplomacy between these two nations seems to be giving way to a new period of heightened tension and rivalry. Shanghai, one of China's largest and most prosperous cities, has become a focal point of public dissent, as protests have erupted in defiance of government control. In a shocking turn of events, citizens have taken to the streets, voicing their frustrations against the ruling Communist Party. What started as a peaceful assembly in Fuxing Park quickly escalated into a full-blown confrontation between police forces and demonstrators. At the heart of this unrest, the people's demand was clear: down with the Communist Party. The boldness of this protest, with citizens openly defying authorities, is a reflection of the growing discontent within China's urban population. The scene was tense. Protesters surrounded police vehicles in an effort to stop the detention of one of their own, a speaker who had been delivering an impassioned address. When officers attempted to force the individual into a patrol car, the crowd intervened, preventing the vehicle from leaving the scene. In a remarkable show of defiance, elderly citizens, some in their 80s, fearlessly confronted the police, shouting anti-government slogans. This standoff, lasting more than 30 minutes, illustrates the deep-seated frustration bubbling beneath the surface in one of China's most important economic hubs. For President Xi Jinping's administration, the implications of such public unrest are profound. While protests in China are not unprecedented, particularly in rural areas where grievances often center around land disputes or labor conditions, it is far less common to see such a direct and confrontational expression of anger in a city like Shanghai. As a symbol of China's modernity and international standing, Shanghai's unrest sends a message that dissatisfaction is not confined to the periphery but has reached the heart of urban China. The underlying reasons for this protest are varied but interconnected. Shanghai's economic pressures, coupled with strict government control, have created an environment where frustration festers. The city, much like the rest of the country, is grappling with a slowing economy, rising unemployment, and a sense of diminishing opportunity, particularly for the younger generation. For many, the protest in Fuxing Park was not just about a singular event or grievance but a broader disillusionment with the government's handling of the economy and the lack of political freedoms. The Chinese government, notoriously swift in its response to public dissent, now faces a delicate situation. While the protest in Shanghai is a stark reminder of the limits of state control, it also highlights the growing challenge for the Chinese Communist Party to maintain order while addressing the economic and social issues that fuel such discontent. The broader concern for Beijing is whether this unrest could inspire similar movements in other major cities, further testing the government's ability to keep a lid on widespread dissent. For the people of Shanghai, this protest marks a turning point, a rare moment where ordinary citizens, young and old, stood together in defiance of authority. While the government may succeed in quelling this particular demonstration, the sentiments that drove these citizens to the streets are unlikely to dissipate anytime soon. The unrest in Shanghai is not just an isolated incident but part of a larger narrative of discontent that is slowly unraveling the image of a stable and thriving China. China's once seemingly unstoppable economic engine is now teetering on the edge of a crisis, as multiple factors have pushed its economy into an increasingly precarious position. The country's impressive growth, which lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty and transformed China into a global economic power, is now facing significant headwinds. The economic slowdown, mounting debt, and structural challenges have placed immense pressure on Beijing to find solutions, but the path forward appears more complicated than ever. One of the most pressing issues is the ballooning local government debt, which continues to rise at an alarming rate. According to recent estimates, interest payments on this debt are expected to exceed 4 trillion yuan by 2024, placing a heavy burden on already strained local governments. The central government's reliance on massive public debt to stimulate growth, though effective in the short term, has raised concerns about long-term sustainability. These measures have provided some temporary relief, but the lack of real structural reforms has made it clear that China's economy is on borrowed time. Adding to this, the country's property sector, once a pillar of growth, is now crumbling under its own weight. Real estate developers are struggling to stay afloat, and the sharp decline in investment in the property market has created a ripple effect across the broader economy. Major companies, which once fueled China's rapid urbanization, are now facing the reality of reduced demand and tightening regulations. This has left many unfinished construction projects across the country, symbolizing the waning confidence in China's real estate sector. The government's attempts to counterbalance these challenges through infrastructure projects have also encountered obstacles. Large-scale projects aimed at boosting employment and consumption have not delivered the desired results. While these efforts were designed to inject life into the slowing economy, the outcomes have been underwhelming, as local governments struggle with mismanagement and corruption, limiting the effectiveness of such investments. Moreover, the international environment has turned increasingly hostile for China, with trade tensions and geopolitical conflicts further complicating Beijing's economic strategy. Relations with key trade partners like the United States and the European Union have soured, leading to sanctions, tariffs, and a general shift in global supply chains away from China. These developments have only exacerbated the challenges faced by Chinese manufacturers, who are already grappling with rising costs and declining global demand. For President Xi Jinping's administration, the stakes could not be higher. The Chinese leadership has long prided itself on economic stability and growth as the cornerstone of its legitimacy. However, the combination of domestic economic struggles and international pressure is testing the limits of the government's ability to maintain control. As protests in major cities like Shanghai demonstrate growing public discontent, Beijing must navigate a delicate balance between managing its economic challenges and maintaining social order. China's economic difficulties are not just short-term setbacks, they represent deep-rooted structural issues that will require significant reforms if the country is to regain its economic momentum. The ongoing economic slowdown is not merely a cyclical downturn but rather the culmination of years of unsustainable growth strategies. Without meaningful change, China risks being trapped in a prolonged period of stagnation, which would have profound implications for both its domestic stability and its standing on the global stage. In the face of these overwhelming challenges, China finds itself increasingly cornered. The road ahead is fraught with uncertainty, and the economic model that once propelled the country to global prominence is now showing clear signs of strain. Whether Beijing can rise to the occasion and enact the necessary reforms remains to be seen, but the economic landscape in China has undoubtedly shifted, and the days of unchecked growth are seemingly over.